Um, I'm Zainab Salbi. I'm a very proud member of Vital Voices. I'm also the founder of Women for Women International and Daughters for Earth, and I am from Iraq and have the pleasure of being in conversation with amazing women from Iran and Afghanistan. And I will start with the one on my left, Iranian American actress and activist Sepideh Moafi, and Afghan women's rights advocate Metra Mehran. We are living in a very important moment in the women's movement, in my opinion, where the agenda of what needs to happen for women in certain countries by the international community are being set by the women of the countries in the countries, sending messages to the international community that we want you and need you to mobilize and support us in this and that way. That is a reverse of a Western-centric agenda that has happened, and I'm not critical of it. It has good and bad. That has happened for so many years. We are now in a new framework, I would say, of the women's movement. And no better example, rather, to talk about this than actually what we are talking about in today's panel, which is End Gender Apartheid. A movement and a campaign that has been set up by Iranian and Afghan women from inside of Afghanistan and outside of Afghanistan, saying that this is how we need to be treated, and this is what we need the international community to revise and adjust its laws to treat us this way. So before we start, actually, the first question is, and I'll send it to Sepideh, is can you explain what gender apartheid really is?
Yes, thank you, Zainab. And thank you all for being here today and holding space for this urgent conversation about gender apartheid. I think we're all acutely aware of the fact that sexism, sexual discrimination, and patriarchy exists everywhere. It certainly exists here. But just in the same way as racism exists everywhere. But there was an official definition for systematic oppression from institutionalized racism in South Africa that defined it as apartheid. That definition caused outside countries to boycott, divest, and essentially shame and isolate the apartheid regime, which helped the internal struggle for non-white South Africans and ultimately led to the toppling of the apartheid regime. Similarly, in Iran with the Islamic Republic and Afghanistan with the Taliban, these are two extreme governments that systematically oppress women from institutionalized sexism. And we are long overdue in calling it what it is, gender apartheid. So in many ways, people get confused and think, oh, is this a cultural thing? This is a religious thing. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to overstep here. But these are excuses, arguments that both the Taliban and the Islamic Republic rely on. We have seen over the past few decades, certainly over the past 8 months, in both Iran and Afghanistan, women are sacrificing and risking everything to demand their freedoms. They are pouring their bodies out onto the streets, demanding a right to education, gender equality, bodily autonomy, a right to their freedoms, and they are met with brutal tactics, violence. They are being imprisoned, they are tortured, raped, and even killed. So I think that it's an insult to sort of dismiss this as a sort of cultural norm. It's an insult to these women, and it's an insult to our cultures, which are beautiful and rich. So the point of this campaign is to enshrine these words, gender apartheid, into international law. And this is one way of helping the internal struggle and recognizing through policy and law what these women are going through. For decades, they have been essentially gaslit, abandoned by their own governments, and in large part by the international communities. And so this is a way of standing in solidarity with a legal framework to support it and no longer tolerating any government, organization, or person trying to dismiss this kind of systematic oppression based on some Orientalist notion of culture and religion.
Thank you, Sepideh. I want to take it to Metra because, we talked about culture and, the Western world in general looks at the entire Muslim world as one culture, which is not true. And often the nuances between all the cultures are missed, actually. Still, I want to ask, how are, again, not only to distinguish how culture from structural policies that makes what's happening in Afghanistan and Iran particularly unique to have this campaign and gender apartheid. Can you talk about that some more?
Thank you. So one thing that distinguish what's happening in Iran and Afghanistan is the systematic segregation and discrimination that is not an individual act, but it's a part of governing system in those countries. So this gender-based violence is happening everywhere, but it's not part of the government. In Afghanistan, in the past 10 months, around 45 decrees have been issued by the Taliban to limit freedom and basic human rights of women in Afghanistan. Women in Afghanistan are basically dehumanized, which means they don't have access to education, they are not allowed to work, they don't have freedom of movement, they don't have access to services. Similarly in Iran, maybe not that extensive, but access to services and basically in public offices required they wear hijab, right? They don't have the option, the choice. Schools are mass poisoned and government is not doing anything. And many protesters and activists both in Afghanistan and Iran are detained, tortured, in cases raped. And these are not happening on individual basis. They are not acts of violence by a group or by an individual, but it's an institutionalized system, legal system of the governments in those parts of the world. So that's why we need to make sure that that's different, and we need a different response for that. In the laws we have in international community, not the laws and policies or conventions like CEDAW, they do condemn these acts, but none of them criminalize it. So what we ask through gender apartheid convention to get approved is criminalize what's happening in those countries.
I'm curious to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add to that because, this sort of discrimination, structural discrimination and oppression, it's supported by the legal framework in Iran and Afghanistan. And so Metra mentioned many examples of laws in Afghanistan and in Iran as well. There is blatant segregation in public spaces, segregation in classrooms, segregation in beaches. Women are forced to sit on the back of the bus. A woman's testimony in the court of law is worth half of that of a man's. And so these are not just discriminations that you and I might face on the street. These are supported by the law. And so both regimes rely on this sort of squashing, this sort of domination, the establishment and maintaining domination over women in order to stay in power. And so while in Afghanistan there is a fuller expression or a stronger conclusion of gender apartheid, the components of subjugation and subordination in both countries are very much the same currently.
How did this come about? How did this campaign come about? And I understand there is a very particular focus and aim to accomplish certain things by 2024. Can you speak more to that, both or either one of you?
So as Sepideh rightly mentioned, the nature of the crimes happening against women in both countries are the same. It's institutional and systematic segregation and discrimination against women. So, and it's a very right time. Women both in Iran and Afghanistan are protesting, demanding justice. And then we thought it's the right time to ask for it. So there are around 100 signatories there. And then some countries, including US Department of State, Canada, Switzerland, have sent inquiries to know how they can engage. Senators and MPs in Canada are reviewing the resolution draft to sign, and then hopefully it become a law if it succeeds by 2024. And then I think the this is the right time that it should be recognized for what it is, what's actually happening on the ground. And then there may be some discussions that what's happening there are some, for example, gender persecution is there in other laws, but it's important to notice that what we push for is a complementary to what's already there, but the nature of the crimes happening are different. There are certain things about it. The first one is it gives a legal framework for the world to engage with those countries. In sanctions, yes, there are sanctions against Taliban in Iran, but they are based on other things. None of them address the discrimination against women. They are, for example, the basis is not women's right or what's happening against women. It also, I think, comes with a moral responsibility and carries a weight for it that shame other people. And the third thing is now, for example, the gender persecution, other state members cannot act. But if gender apartheid convention gets approved, it enable us to keep other countries state members of UN who are part of the Apartheid Convention accountable. So they have to then act, pass resolution, and agree on policies that are in place to act against what's happening. For example, some countries abstain, some countries don't feel responsible towards what's happening in those countries. But if this is a law, then everyone get responsible to act in their own countries. Third member states then will have the legal obligation to act within their states too. For example, if someone from Iran or Afghanistan travel to one of those countries, then they will be authorized to arrest them for what's happening in those countries, that now we don't have anything as such.
I mean, this is what's so amazing about this, because you're tackling it from a very legal, strategic perspective. This is not a speech someone is giving, and there were uses of gender apartheid back in the 80s, but it's just a speech. But you are actually, this is a group of women's rights and human rights and lawyers who are coming together and saying this is how we want to tackle it. Can you tell us more about how it started?
Yeah, I mean, this is a group of dissidents and human rights leaders from within these two countries who were taking all of our cues. I mean, I'm just a microphone. Metra has a lot more lived experience than I do, but I'm a microphone here, and I'm just here to amplify the demands of what these women are asking for within, because their voices have been silenced for far too long. And so why now? Yes, this should have happened decades ago. This has been going on for far too long. But there is a certain momentum that we're trying to ride right now, and the connection between the dissidents inside, the human rights leaders inside, and diaspora dissidents, human rights groups and lawyers and leaders around the world has never been stronger. And so, yes, this was a demand coming directly from inside, and the goal, again, is to push governments to expand the legal interpretation of apartheid, to include not only racial hierarchies, but gender hierarchies. But beyond the international legal arena, I think this is a huge opportunity for us to shift the paradigm with regards to how we relate to these countries, how we relate, to these regimes, the oppressors, as opposed to the people inside, the oppressed. This is an opportunity to elevate our collective consciousness so that moving forward, no matter what, any time the Taliban or the Islamic Republic is mentioned, their identities are forever bound, forever shackled to the words gender apartheid. And words matter. Definitions matter. And so I'm hopeful, I think everyone is hopeful that we will be able to create a ripple effect and create a tsunami of change, not just inside Iran and Afghanistan, but a huge step forward in dismantling the global systems of patriarchy.
I mean, what's so amazing also is like how strategic, as I said, women are fighting back. And there are two stories in the last 3 years, basically. The evacuation of the International Committee from Afghanistan, how do I say it, betrayed Afghan women maybe, you know, or just sacrifice or women's rights in Afghanistan. And then we have the historical women-led revolution for the first time in modern times, not beyond the region, beyond Iran, that women lead a revolution centered around women's rights, and men and everyone else joined them, basically. So we have the momentum for me is also very significant in these two incidents, you know, where women are fighting back from within these countries, and they need our support. Metra, can you tell me what's happening since the campaign launched? The campaign is only launched on March 8th this year. You know, this is amazing. It's still young campaign, however, got great momentum and great press. Can you tell us what has happened since?
I think the good thing is there is a lot of more discussion there, and then the term is more used more often, and hopefully it become more prominent and exists in literature too, because we have seen many papers out there. But as I said before, attention around it is amazing too. Because different countries are, especially their authorities, are interested to join. And then the Canadian MPs and senators are showing interest. I think they are reviewing the convention, the resolution draft. Hopefully they sign it. And then there are many papers coming out, and a group of gender experts and international lawyers are working on it to submit the resolution draft, which hopefully it gets the vote it needs. But before that, I think our friends are working hard to make sure the parliament members in different countries see the draft resolution and put it there for their parliaments to review and talk about it. But at the same time, a large group of women, of course, both who are here, who try to amplify the voices of inside, are there. But even if you go to the website and you don't see the name of many women because of the security risk, you don't see many protesters' name from Afghanistan and Iran, but they have many of them signed, and even some wanted to take the risk and, you know, and their names be there. But we made sure that all caution is enough there, that we put them not at risk. But even if you don't see the names, there are a large number of women protesters who have signed it and continuously talk about it.
Thank you. And I know also, actually, just to add to that, I know there has been a great press for that. The Guardian has covered it as an example. I know public figures like Graça Machel has signed in, and Elif Shafak and V, and women from Turkey and from South Africa and different countries around the world really showing up and joining. Sepideh, what can everyday women here, not everyday women and women activists do? And to take it back to my opening, you know, this is like we are in a shifting stage of the agenda being set by Iranian and Afghan women rather than by women in the Western world, right? How can they support? We need everyone's support. We need the global women's movement, but there is also fear that this cannot be seen as a Western set agenda. Or how can everyone here and beyond be supportive of that while understanding and respecting the politics of it?
I mean, it's pretty clear, as we both mentioned, these demands are coming from within. They're not saying, as many people have said, and the person who pops up in my head is renowned human rights activist Mahsi Ali-Nejad says, we're not asking you to save us, you're asking us to stop saving our oppressors. And so this is key in moving forward with all of this. Every single one of us using whatever platform, whatever room, whatever connection we have to bring this issue up. And this is such a beautiful campaign because, as you said, it's supported with, you know, legal, you know, it's not just an emotional campaign of like, these are our demands. This is led by human rights lawyers. You know what I mean? They're the ones who are charging us forward here and giving us our marching orders, really. And so one thing that we can all do today is go to the website End Apartheid endgenderapartheid.today. Again, that's endgenderapartheid.today. And you can read more about what we're talking about here. Every question you could possibly ask, I'm pretty sure, is included on this website. You can read the list of signatories, and you can also add your name. And this is an effective way of keeping on top of what's happening with this campaign. And as simple as this sounds, it might sound silly, but really just even doing a Google search every week, Iran, Afghanistan, and looking at what the latest headlines are, following human rights activists or lawyers or groups. One of my dear friends and mentors, Roya Burumand, is here, who's rolling her eyes at me. And she runs the Abdurrahman Burumand Center, Iran Rights Center, and they have been doing this work documenting the Islamic Republic's crimes against humanity for decades now, getting involved with the organizations that have been doing this work for a long time. But again, it's put simply, and all the information you need is on the website, endgenderapartheid.today. And really, like you said, this is about chasing and generating more momentum from what's already there. And the momentum is only there because we keep it visible. We continue to amplify. This has been happening, these uprisings. I'll speak for Iran just for a moment. This has been happening for decades. The first uprising came days after Khomeini took power, when he required women he put the mandatory, the hijab mandate in the workplace for women. And it was on International Women's Day in 1979, March 8th, that more than 10,000 women stormed the streets and marched for their bodily autonomy. So this has happened throughout decades. In 1999, it happened, in 2009, and in 2019. But what we see here today is the first movement in Iran where women are so openly at the forefront of what many people are calling a woman-led revolution. Often in the past, women in any circumstance, but particularly in uprisings, they're scooted to the sidelines and said, we'll get to your issues later. But it's actually the women now who have been teaching the world about the intersectionalities of gender equality, the plight of ethnic, religious, and sexual and other marginalized groups who are fighting for basic human rights and dignity. And this is all sort of encapsulated in the slogan, the Kurdish slogan, which has become sort of the battle cry for this revolution, Jen Jian Azadi, woman, life, freedom, the first word being woman. So I think that says it all. This is not a matter of what is happening there. This affects all of womanhood, and we've seen and felt the rollback of our own rights here. And again, it's just in Afghanistan, in Iran, these are just fuller expressions of this sort of systematic oppression, domination over women. And it's up to all of us to rise up and stand in solidarity together.
That's beautiful. Metra, take us more to the global context. Beside the legal strategy, what are you really hoping to achieve in terms of more immediate international responses?
Adding to what Sepideh John said, amplifying the voice is very, very key. And one more thing you can do is write a letter to your senators and to your MPs, because they are the ones that are gonna make a decision at the end of it. Global responses, just hear from the women inside Iran and Afghanistan. They are taking the risk, facing gunshots, but making sure to be on the street. Even media cannot cover their protests. They take videos with their phones, put it in social media, or message it to us, we can put it out there. If they are accepting that level of risk just to voice what they want, it's our moral and ethical obligation to hear from them. I think it's not fair that we make a decision for them for whatever reason we believe is right, first. Second, I think whatever decision or foreign policy countries have at this time should be women-centered, because their voice is loud. Their demands are very clear. So it is the very first thing that everyone should do is listen to what people are demanding in those countries, right? If they say this is not our culture, if they say we don't accept this law, or if they say we don't accept this religion, or not, even not interpretation of this religion, we should listen to them. Because so far, I think for the political interest of many countries, rights and human dignity of women in those countries are being sacrificed. We should give them the choice, and that only happens if we listen to them. You know, it doesn't take a lot of time. Not everything is very clear, as Sepideh John said, if you just Google what's happening. They make sure they put it out there, even if media is not covering it. Media is afraid basically to go to streets with women, but they are taking the risk in going there. So I think globally, it's the right time that the world listen to women in Afghanistan and Iran.
Yeah. I have to say, you know, as a woman who is from the region, neither from the Afghanistan or Iran, but from the region, I think the most dangerous thing is if the Western world lifts its hands and says, this is too complicated. We do not understand these Muslim countries. We do not understand. This is their culture. And I hear it in politicians' statements, frankly, in America and otherwise. I hear it in everyday statements. Oh, these Muslims, we don't. I think what we need is courage to show up and to support what women from the regions and from these particular two countries are saying. And this could be a game changer if we actually pass a law on ending gender apartheid. It has an economic consequences, political consequences. So first, don't be shy. Like, this is not the time to be afraid of how do we support. The second is, and I'm like speaking to the choir in here, I am a believer in the hearts of my hearts in the power of women uniting and getting the job done. I've seen it over and over and over again. I've seen it in Vital Voices in Women, all the women's organizations. It's like but particularly, honestly, I have to give credit to Vital Voices and also mobilizing so much in so many different examples. So this is the time I have, like, you know, we're asking everyone to join, sign, call, do everything, and educate, I would say. Like, we are being educated of what it means to be a woman from these regions. That this is not our culture, actually. No, this is not our religion either, you know, and that these are very particular interpretations of all of these things, and they're normalized.
And they are set, these cultural standards are set and determined, defined by men.
Yeah.
Culture is elastic. Culture evolves and grows. And so, yes, all of our cultures might be dissimilar. They might not be the same, but we have to listen to the people who are determining what the cultural norms are. They are men who are telling us that women want to be oppressed. And that just, I mean, in all of our bodies, I don't think that feels right. So, as a mentor of mine said, you know, we cannot tolerate for them what we would not tolerate for ourselves.
I want to end with Metra. Any last word on, like, what's at risk if this doesn't pass? If gender apartheid becomes normalized?
Dehumanization of women in those countries, which already are. And if you think things doesn't get worse, then you are wrong. It can get worse at cost of having millions of women in those countries live without human dignity, and allowing extremists with their own regimes to dehumanize women. So I think that's the word I want to say and ask everyone to sign the Gender Apartheid campaign and join us for amplifying their voices.
Yeah, I believe we can do it. With your leaderships and your support, I believe we can do it, and with everyone's support and pushing from the front or the back. You know, it doesn't matter how we push. And before we end, I want to bring three amazing guests: Nazim Azimi, Abdul Quddus Hafizi, and Metra Khamush, I hope. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I'm from the region and I'm not saying it correctly. Who painted a mural and who just finished the mural. They're Afghan artists who recently came from Afghanistan, from the organization Art Lords, who unfortunately had to evacuate. But the organization has been established of grassroots artists, volunteers since 2014, and they just did these murals for Afghan and Iranian women. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And bless you for this. And you know, the art is always for me is the most important frontier to keep the story going in so many ways. My mom used to say, when the artist dies, all else dies. But I see that you are alive and alive and alive. And I believe that we are all part of the one. When one of us is harmed, we are all harmed. And one of us is helped, we create the path for all of our help. So thank you for creating that path for all of us. And thank you for this amazing work. And thank you for your amazing work. Thank you so, so much. Thank you. Bravo, bravo.